I'm Chef Robert, and welcome to my kitchen. It's a beautiful Saturday morning, and what I'm going to do today, I got some requests from mainly my mother and my relatives and some friends to talk to everyone about sourdough bread baking. So the thing is we've all had, some of us have had a little extra time during this time to kind of get back to the basics and a little extra time around the house to do things, and sourdough bread baking is one of those things that everybody's like to do. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through the motions of putting together a good, solid, artisan sourdough bread. The recipe I'm using is based on the book by Ken Forkish, all right, called Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast. All right, this is, I've read through most of it. It's a really good book. He really explains things, but, sometimes a video helps a little more. I do things slightly different than he does, and I'll explain those steps as we go. So, first things first, let's talk about a little equipment that can make it easier for you to do this. Now, you don't need all this equipment. You can do it probably with the basic stuff you have in your house. People have been doing it for thousands of years without all this equipment, so it's possible. But I find these things make the process a little easier and make the end result a little nicer. So first things first is I have some good plastic containers. To proof my bread, I have a good 6-quart container. Now this recipe is going to make 2 large loaves. Okay, so the 6-quart container is perfect because once it gets to the top of this container, it's ready. It's already doubled in size. All right, I have a little 4-quart container that I use for my starter, or the levain as it's called. Okay, because it's been started. It's pretty good. And also, measuring cups, measuring spoons. Hopefully you have those. I have proofing baskets. You can get these online through Amazon. You can get them at most a good cooking store. They come in different shapes. This is the round, all right, and it's just a rattan basket that helps the dough aerate as it proofs. And of course, your basic supplies, just like the book says: flour, water, salt, yeast. That's all you need. You don't need to do anything else. There's a lot of commercial sourdoughs that will, if you look at the ingredients, they have things like vinegar in them to taste more sour. You don't need that, okay? Each sourdough will be a little different based on the environment, what it's made in. That's why San Francisco is so famous. The salt air, they have a lot of things going around in there, and their sourdough is a little more sour than most. So it really just depends. So let's talk about the levain. So here's mine. I fed it last night. I took it out of the refrigerator. I keep it in the refrigerator, a little bit of it in a little Ziploc bag. All right, I bake once a week. If you're gonna bake every day, you don't need to put it in the refrigerator, but you need to feed it more often. One of the biggest problems of the popularity of making sourdough bread has been having a hard time getting flour. So, feeding it every day and baking it every day is a little difficult for me right now. And also, I'm working, so I'm not home to bake it every day, and I don't have an army to eat it. So I find that on the weekend, if I bake 2 large loaves, it will generally take us through the week with sandwiches and whatnot, things like that. So that's about enough. Sometimes, I may go ahead on Sunday and make another batch. So this is my starter. I pulled it out last night right before I went to bed at around 11. And I fed it with about 500 grams of flour, about 100 grams of wheat flour, 400 grams of white flour, and water. That's all that should be in your starter. If you are, and creating your starter is a whole different thing. I didn't really want to go into that since mine has been going for a while, and there's no need for me to create a new one. So you can look online, research online about how to get it started. It's also in the book here. If you want to get this book, I just recommend it, and it'll take you step by step on how to get your levain started. So mine has been going since I want to say June. It's going nice and strong. I fed it last night. I pulled it out of the refrigerator and fed it last night. And when I mixed the flour in, it was about to here. And so the next morning, it's doubled in size. That's what you want to look for. It's been going about 8 hours. And so generally that's its peak. So remember, the levain is kind of like a living animal, okay? It's going to have a peak when you feed it. And it's going to slowly eat all that, and it's going to rise and rise and rise and rise, and then it's going to get to a peak, and then it's going to start going back down, all right? And it may not go down a lot as far as volume goes, but what's going to happen is the efficacy of the yeast is going to drop as it goes throughout the day. That's why, if I was going to keep this out and use it again tomorrow, I would feed it again tonight, and I would probably throw out most of it. A lot of people freak out about having to throw it out. Once it's gone past its peak, it's not much good for anything. It's not really gonna make a great bread. Now that's when you can use the excess. You can use it in pancake dough, waffle, or pancake batter, waffle batter, biscuit dough, things like that. You can mix a little into that, and what that is it's a flavoring agent. It's not going to make the products any rise anymore or anything else. What it's going to do is just going to be a little bit of a flavoring agent and make them that much better. So again, this is my levain. It's been fed. It's rising nicely. If I open it up and crack it open, it smells like, we're about to either brew some beer or, distill some whiskey or something. It's got a little bit of that alcohol smell to it, because that is the byproduct. Okay, now don't worry, this isn't gonna get you there. The last very important piece of equipment that I highly recommend is a digital scale. So any digital scale will do. They all generally work both in pounds and kilograms. I'm using kilograms, and they use kilograms for most recipes like this. The reason they do that is not to be difficult, but it's more exact. Okay, a gram of something is a very tiny, tiny amount. So you can get real exact with your measurements on this. Now, bread making, it doesn't have to be exact. If you have a little too much flour, a little too much water, that's fine. What you're looking for is consistency, and we'll get into that once we actually get to mixing the dough. So the nice thing about this digital scale is I can also zero it out, and it has a separator, so if I'm putting a big container on there, I can still see my readout. And so that's the greatest thing about using a digital scale to cook, or especially to bake, is if you have your ingredients measured in weight, you can zero it out as you add each ingredient. So you're not doing a bunch of measuring cups and spoons and using a whole lot of other equipment to mix everything. So really, all I'm using here is my container. So I have my 6-quart container. I'm going to put it on my scale, make sure I'm on grams, and I'm going to zero it out. So this is the first step. What I want to do is I want to mix the flour and the water together and just let it sit for a little bit. All right, this is called the autolyse, and all you're doing is making sure that the flour and the water are just getting together and getting happy. All right, that all your flour is really soaking up all the water and there's no dry bits left. So what I have is 620 grams of water. I'm going to go ahead and heat that up. This is the part where you're going to have to experiment at home. Okay, I have a nice cold filtered water from the refrigerator, and I'm going to take it, and I know to get it up to about 90 to 95 degrees in my microwave, it's going to take 1.5 minutes. So what you do is you get an instant read thermometer, put it in there, make sure it's warm. You can use water from the tap, but sometimes that has a lot of impurities in it. My local water has a lot of chlorine in it. I don't want that in my bread, so I use filtered water, which comes out cold. So I know I've got to heat it up to 90 to 95 degrees, and it's going to take me about 1.5 minutes. Just experiment with what the ingredients you have in your kitchen and figure out what it takes, as long as you're at that 90 to 95 degree mark. So let me put this in the microwave. Okay, while that's going, I can go ahead and get my flour. So this recipe uses a combination of whole wheat flour and unbleached all-purpose flour. Unbleached is kind of important. Can you make it with bleached flour? Sure you can, no problem. But why? Why would you need, this was something that was started in the market a long time ago when white bread was the thing, and the whiter the better, so they bleached the flour, and now it's just keeps going, but there's no reason to buy it, there's no reason to use it. It doesn't help the final product any other than making it whiter. Who cares? All right, I want my ingredients as good as I can get them, but I don't want them as processed as I can get them. So generally, I'll just use regular, unbleached, all-purpose flour. You don't need to get bread flour. That's, flour that they've added a little extra gluten to. You don't need that, okay? So just regular, all-purpose, unbleached flour. All right, so I'm going to start with whole wheat flour. The recipe calls for 60 grams, okay? You can add a little more if you want. This is where you experiment, all right? As long as the total is going to be about 800 grams per the recipe. His dough is a little loose and a little sticky. I found that adding a little extra flour, just 50 extra grams of flour to this recipe, helped me get a little better dough that ended up rising a little better. Again, this is where you get to experiment and kind of have fun with it. The problem is you're going through a long process to get an end result. So each time I bake, I find that I can do something slightly different and come out with a slightly different loaf. All right, so here's the great thing about the scale is I don't have a measuring cup, right? So I'm just gonna dump in about 60 grams. 60 grams is not a lot. It's actually a little less than a cup. So I'm just gonna watch the number as it goes up here. And there we go, I got 65 grams. No big deal. All right, as long as my end total meets that. Now, could you use whole wheat flour by itself? Yes, you could, but the thing about whole wheat flour is it's very heavy. It makes a very heavy loaf. A lot of the wheat bread you buy in the store, which, once you make this, you'll probably never do again. It's actually a mixture. It'll say 100% whole wheat bread, but by law, it really only has to be so much whole wheat flour in it. Because as long as you have a certain amount of whole wheat flour, they can claim that 100%. But if you have a bread dough that's made from all whole wheat, it's gonna be pretty heavy, it's not gonna rise as much, and it's gonna be thicker. So experiment with it if you want. But I found to get that traditional sourdough bread, of course, is used with mostly white flour. And you don't have to use wheat flour at all. Let me get my water. All right, so I'm blabbing on about this first step, but I want to make sure everybody understands the why of it before we get started. The how of it is pretty easy when you get down to it. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. So now I'm going to add my unbleached all-purpose flour, all right, and I'm going to get my mixture up to about a total of 850 grams, so now I can get a little more liberal with dumping it in there. Here's the thing, if you get too much, you just scoop it out. But I think everybody will agree that this is a very freeing moment when you get to the scale and you can just dump things in the container. All right, we're about there. Again, a gram is a very small measurement, so you think, wow, 800 grams, that sounds like a lot. No, it's just about 4 cups or so. All right, I'm going to take a little bit back out. Got a little carried away there. All right, so now I have my flour all ready to go. Okay, I'm going to get in here and I'm going to mix it up. All right, and I've got my warm water. And hey, if it's colder outside, you can make that water about 5 degrees warmer and it might help it rise faster. It's, the rising is going to be based on the temperature. A lot of ovens have proof settings. You can use that, and what it does is it turns the oven on to 80 degrees. I just let it go naturally because throughout my day I'm going to go do other things. And I'm going to just check up on the bread as it goes. And, I got plenty of time today, so I'm not worried about it. All right, so what I'm going to do is mix the water into the flour real well. I've got my magic wooden spoon. You can use your hands if you want to. Bread baking is a lot about using your hands, but, this spoon is from my mother-in-law, so it's a little sentimental. And she used to bake sourdough bread all the time. And, my wife talked about it growing up, so she was real excited when I started doing it. And so I feel like using this little wooden spoon kind of brings her spirit into the process. So what I'm looking to do is to make sure that all the flour is wet. Okay? So again, this is we haven't added any of the levain, we haven't added any of the salt or anything else. So all I'm doing is letting this flour rest and letting it get wet. Okay, so if I can bring the camera closer, my glare isn't that bad. That's what we have there. Just basic paste, essentially, flour and water. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to let it sit for about 30 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, just to let it relax. Let the flour and the water get to know each other. All right, so I'm going to press that down. I'm going to put my lid on. And I'm going to go enjoy a cup of coffee. We'll be back. All right, so now we come to the important part where we're actually going to mix the bread together. Okay, so I've washed my hands. I didn't think you needed to watch me wash my hands, but I have. You want to wash your hands for this part of it. Okay, all right, so we have our autolays right here. Okay, so as you see, the flour and the water have gotten to know each other. The dough is a little sticky, but not a lot. All right, so I have a little pan here. You can use a pan, a bowl, anything you want it with some warm water in it. Okay, I'm going to zero that out. And now we're going to get our levain, or our starter. We're going to have that ready. Now this recipe is a belt and suspenders recipe. Okay, so I have my salt. All right, this 21 grams of salt is kosher salt. You don't have to do anything special. You can use regular salt. It's just 21 grams, okay? All right, so what the salt does, it also flavors the bread, and it also keeps the yeast from getting out of control while it's proofing. So it kind of retards the yeast a little bit. And I'm also going to use a ½ teaspoon of dried yeast. Okay, I kind of recommend this kind that comes in the jar. You keep it in the refrigerator to keep it fresh. It's just easier to get in than a packet. It's easier to measure. I just come in. So again, like I said, it's belt and suspenders. There's a little bit. I mean, this much yeast would not make this much bread by itself. But what it does is it kind of supports the levain. It gives you a more consistent product. If you don't want to use it, you can try experimenting without using it. There's some things when I read a recipe written by an expert, I just go with. And so I'm going to go with that. All right, so let me get my... So I'm just going to kind of get that yeast and that salt into the dough a little bit. All right, and you can already see with just this sitting around for, 30, 45 minutes, it's starting to look like bread dough. I can push it down and it bounces back a little bit, and we're just adding the parts that make it do that. So that's why that step is kind of important, because it gets the flour ready to do its job. All right, so mix that in a little bit. All right, I'm going to set this over here so it's a little out of the way. All right, so I have my levain, right? It's been going for about 9 hours. It's nice and bubbly. You can see those bubbles happen. This is where you want smell-o-vision. It smells like we just went into a brewery. So what I want is about 360 grams. So I'm going to pour it into this little dish of water, because otherwise it's really, really, really ooey gooey and sticky, and it would be hard to get out of a container. You'd have to scrape it out with a rubber spatula and all that. This way it lifts right out of the water. Yes, some will be in the water. Yes, some, you may not get that exact 360 grams. If you get 380 grams, it's not the end of the world, okay? Because this bread is all about consistency. Okay, so I've got my scale zeroed out. So I'm just gonna help it get in there. You see it's very ooey gooey and sticky. This is the part where you wanna kind of work quickly, all right? So 360 grams sounds like a lot. It's not as much as you think. See, that's 220. All right, boy, that's 360 on the nose. I'm gonna do an extra spoonful though, because it might leave some in the water, and I wanna make sure and get at least 360 grams in. All right, so I wanna kind of work quickly here. I got it in there, I got it measured. I'm gonna just scoop it out right into the bread. Boom, see, that water's still nice and clean. Now here's the thing, when you're mixing this bread, as you can see, the levain's very sticky and wet. All right, the bread dough is a little drier. What I want to do is I want to work this with my hands. I don't want to overwork it. I just want to pinch it slightly, okay, until all the ingredients feel like they've combined. You'll feel the difference between the levain and the rest of the bread dough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of this warm water. I'm going to put it on my hands. It's going to keep it from sticking to my hands as much. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch my fingers together and roll around that dough, kind of get from the bottom, okay? And I want to make sure what I'm feeling for, you can feel that grain of the kosher salt. That's why I like the kosher salt, because you can feel when it's mixed, when you stop feeling the grain of the salt. And you'll also feel the difference between the levain, which is stickier and cooler, and the rest of the bread dough. So just keep mixing it around until you feel like it's mixed. All right, if your hands start to get sticky, as you see, that's coming off pretty good. Just dip them in a little more warm water. And I'm gonna use this hand too, because I've still got a lot of that on there that I wanna get off. Again, this is the fun part of baking bread, getting your hands in it. All right. A lot of people can't tolerate that kind of thing, but I don't know what's wrong with them. All right. This is what we call God's tools. All right. And it also allows you to kind of be one with the dough. All right. So we're just about done here. When I said it's all about consistency, I don't mean doing things the same way every time. Well, that's part of it. I mean the consistency of the dough. All right, the dough should feel the same all over. If you're still feeling that difference between the two, then you need to keep mixing it. But this isn't that bread machine, Hobart mixer kind of bread dough. Okay, you don't want to beat the heck out of it. You want to just gently mix it together, and it's about there. So as you can see, it's a pretty sticky dough, right? But as it proofs and as we stretch it, it will get less sticky as we go. All right, but that's that 50 extra grams of flour that I added. I think it gives it a little more. So as you can see, I'm pushing at this dough and it's already pushing back a little bit. All right, that'll get even better as we go. So let's see, get all that on there. All right, so now I'm gonna put the lid on. All right, and I'm gonna go wash my hands and we're gonna let this sit for 30 minutes. Okay, so go ahead and set a timer for about 30 minutes and we'll be back. All right. So it's been about 30-35 minutes. This is our first time we're gonna stretch the dough, okay? So as you can see, look, there's already bubbles forming in the dough. So that's good. If I poke it, it bounces right back, right? So it fills up that spot. That's why I know things are working. All right, so I have my hands wet. Okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in on the side, I'm gonna pull and stretch and fold over. And I'm going to do that on each, well, I know it's a round container, but about on each corner until every side has been folded over. Stretch, fold over. Stretch, fold over. This part will kind of get that gluten going in the dough, and in the end it will give you that nice fluffy rise. So I'm going to just take the whole thing and kind of roll it over there. All right, this is the first one, so it's a little sticky, but as this goes on, it will get less and less sticky, and you will see the gluten forming almost like a skin on the outside of the bread. All right, so we're going to do this 3 more times. Okay, this is our first one, so for a total of 4. So I'm going to set my clock again for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to come do it again. And then I'm going to do that a total of 4 times before we get to the final rise. Okay, and the final rise will be about 2.5 hours. It depends on what your temperature is in your house and outside. If it's a little cooler, then it might take a little longer. I don't like using like oven proofers or stuff like that. You can do that certainly if you want to, but I just prefer it to rise naturally. If it takes an extra hour, it takes an extra hour. Okay, so time on the clock is about 10. After our 4 foldings, this dough should be ready to roll out somewhere around 3:30. Okay, so we'll see you back then to roll out the final one. Okay, so we're at our 4th fold. If you come look at the bread, you can see it's starting to rise. It's a lot more bubbly. It's a lot less sticky. All right, so it's also more stretchy. So I'm gonna stretch it one more time. So I can stretch it way up here without it tearing. You don't really want it to tear, but you do want to stretch that dough. So you can see that gluten is forming well. Gluten's not a bad thing unless you're actually allergic to it. And actually the sourdough, because it is fermented, actually helps your body process the gluten better. So a true levain only sourdough bread, you know, if you're a little gluten intolerant, you could probably tolerate this bread just fine. Okay, so I'm going to put it there. I'm going to set a timer for about 2.5 hours, or you could set it for 2 and check it then, but it's a little winter time, it's a little cool outside, so it's probably going to take a good 2.5 hours. And as you can see on my 6-quart bucket, right now it's gone back down to right about 2 quarts. I want it right up here close to 6 quarts when we're done. It should double in size. It should be about right to the ridge here. You don't want it to go too far, because if it goes too far and it overproofs, you're going to end up with a loaf that has a lot of holes in it. Okay, so we're going to sit there and wait, and then I will come back and show you how to form it into loaves. All right, welcome back. So now it has been 2.5 hours since we last put this in. Like I said, it should be up to this edge here. It's more than doubled in size. I don't want to let it go too long, because then it has too much air in it and you end up getting those giant bubbles on the inside of your bread, and you just don't want to overproof it. All right. So what I'm going to do, so I've got my surface, I've cleaned it, I've put out some flour on it, and I'm not going to be in a rush. All right, if I were just to like to pull it all out, a lot would stick to the sides, but I'm just going to let it pull itself away from the sides, and you will see that most of it will come off. So, of course, that is the mainstay of bread baking, is patience. So even though it's nice and sticky, it's also got some elasticity to it. I'm just going to slowly tilt this the other way. You can see? All right. So that comes out. All right, so I've got my proofing baskets ready, okay? And what I have here is a little rice flour. It's just in a little shaker, or you can, you know, sprinkle it with your hands, whatever. I just found this is a little easier. So it's just some rice flour. The reason I'm using rice flour instead of regular flour is rice flour has more absorbent qualities to it, and it will help keep the dough from sticking to the basket. Now, if you don't have one of these baskets, you could use a normal basket. Here, I'll get one here. Okay, so I could use a normal basket like this, but of course this is not as food safe as this is. So I could take, you know, a clean linen cloth and put it in, and you would be able to turn it over into the pan the same way. Just different options for what you're going to use. So I'm going to take this rice flour, I'm just going to sprinkle it on the inside. I'm going to be pretty liberal with it. Make sure to get that inside coated. Like that, all right. I'll put a little more over the top of the bread once I get it. So I'm going to get this other one ready so they're ready to go. And then we'll go through shaping the loaves. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to take a little bit of extra flour. I'm just going to make myself a line down the middle of the bread, okay? It's not exact. If you feel the need to be that exact person and weigh the loaves as you put them in, feel free to do that. I don't think it's necessary. So as I cut down, the dough isn't going to stick very well. So it's just like cell division, right? Okay. Again, there's lots of different techniques for this. Other people will teach you differently. This is how I do it. It works for me. You can see there's a lot of big bubbles in the bread. So we're going to really, the process of this is to shape it into a loaf, work out some of those bigger bubbles, okay? So I'm gonna take it and just pull it in on itself. So if you notice here, the outside skin looks different from this part that was in contact, and that's why I dumped it out that way, because this is forming more of a skin than this, and that's what's gonna give us our nice crispy crust on the outside. So I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna fold it in both ways, and then fold it in from the sides, and I'm just gonna roll it over and get some of my excess flour under it, okay? And as I work and I need a little more flour, I'm just gonna scrape it up from there. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a little over the top, spread it out. All right, kind of looks already loaf shaped, right? But you see there's a lot of big air bubbles. So what I'm gonna do, as I do it, I'm gonna just gently pop those. I don't wanna tear up the bread, but I'm gonna just gently pop it. And then as I'm forming the loaf, I have one hand straight down like a karate chop. The other hand is going underneath. What you don't wanna do is push your fingers up and under, because you're gonna end up with a large donut instead of a loaf, okay? When I'm pushing my hand underneath, I'm pushing it straight to this hand just like that, okay? So I'm doing that. As you see, as I do this, you see those bubbles getting bigger, right? If I just left it like that, there'd be that giant bubble at the top of my bread, and I'd cut into it and there'd be a lot of air. You want little bits of air, because bread is all about air, believe it or not. It's at least 50% air. All right, so I'm just gonna kind of gently squeeze as I go. Again, I'm gonna need a little more flour over the top. All right. So now it's starting to look a little more like a loaf. Gotten most of the air bubbles out of it. You're gonna have some, and that's okay. If you try to get them all out and you end up overworking your loaf, and you see right now I have this nice little skin on the outside, but I also see this big bubble, so I'm gonna work that out. All right, if I kept working this too much, that skin would start to bust, and it wouldn't be as nice looking. I'll get over here and get that one out of there. All right. All right, so at this point, I'm ready, okay? Happy with the way it looks. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this first one in the basket. This is gonna be the top of the bread, but it's gonna go on the bottom of the basket, okay? So I'm gonna flip it over that way. So as you see, the underside is not as pretty looking, right? Okay, we're gonna do the same thing with this one. Again, just kind of get those ends over themselves. And we're gonna flip it over. And this is the most labor intensive part of this right here. So up until now, it's just been waiting, you know, a little bit of time, do this, a little bit of time, do that. So it requires time, but it doesn't require spending all day on it. Okay. Add a little dusting of flour over the top. Put it in there. All right. So you'll see what I mean if you try to use regular flour versus the rice flour to line the inside of the bowls. I mean, historically they used rice flour to powder wigs with for the reason that it was absorbent. So I'm going to put a little more on the top side. And again, these came with linen bags that I could use, so I wouldn't have to use the flour, but I like the effect of the flour better, and I like the way that the loaf looks after you dump it out of these proofing beds. All right, clean up my mess a little bit here. All right, so I have here two 2-gallon Ziploc bags. All right, you can use any kind of plastic bag you want, but these fit, give plenty of room for the baskets. You know. So what this is gonna do is kind of keep the dough from drying out too much, but it gives it enough air. There's enough residual air inside the bag to where it's able to survive that. Okay. All right, so from here, you know, again, this is where the waiting is the hardest part, just like Tom Petty said. Okay, so from here, what you're gonna do is you're gonna put these in the refrigerator overnight. You want them to run about 15 hours, okay? Sounds like a long time, but this is where the real magic happens. So if I were to let these sit out and proof again, then I could bake it and it would be good. But putting them in the refrigerator overnight and letting them do a slow rise, you know, the refrigerator won't kill the yeast. Now the freezer would, but the refrigerator won't. It just retards it. And so what would happen there is it's a very slow rise, okay? And that slow rise allows that gluten and everything else to develop more, allows that fermentation to keep going more, and that's what gives you a really, really tasty bread in the long run. Okay, so get some of this off my hands. So I'm gonna put those in the refrigerator overnight, and then I will show you how I pull them out to bake them in the morning. Again, it's 3:15. All right, so in the morning I'm gonna pull them out at about 6 a.m., get my oven going, make sure my Dutch oven is in there warming up, and we will bake one at a time. You can bake them both on a sheet pan if you wanted to, but I like baking them one at a time in the Dutch oven. It gives it a nice crispy crust. All right, last thing I'm gonna do, I am not gonna bake bread again tomorrow. So I have my levain that's left over. Like I said, you could use that in pancake batter, waffle batter, whatever you want to use, but I want to save at least 300 grams of it to use next week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the refrigerator, and again, that retards it, keeps it from overgrowing, and then next week when I'm ready to bake bread, I'll pull it out again, set it out overnight, and feed it. All right, but I'm going to need at least 200 grams to do that. So I want at least 300 grams because, you know, it's very sticky and it's going to stick to the inside of the bag. So I just have a little Ziploc freezer bag. I'm going to fill it most of the way. You don't have to measure exactly, I know. You know, and when you go to feed your yeast, you see that doesn't look like a whole lot, but I guarantee that's probably about 150 grams right there. Okay, if not more. So I'm going to pull this out. I'll zip it up. I'll put it in the refrigerator along with our loaves, and I'll finish cleaning up, and we'll see what happens in the morning. All right, so now after all this time, we come to the moment of truth. Okay, I have my oven preheated to 475. I have the Dutch oven inside it, making sure it gets nice and hot. So just when you turn the oven on, put the Dutch oven on, put the Dutch oven in there, and that way it'll be nice and hot, which helps keep a non-stick surface. Okay, so here is the bread in my proof bag. I'm going to take it out of the proof bag. As you can see, it got a little moisture on the inside. And there's a little moisture on the bread itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a little bit of my rice flour. I found that this kind of prevents it from having a hard, sticky bottom. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of that rice flour on and very gently kind of smooth it out. All right. So in the book, when they talk about transferring this to the Dutch oven, he says to gently lift it out. I found that in trying to lift it out, I end up deflating the loaf too much. Okay, so I will show you my method of doing it. I'm going to pull the Dutch oven out. Please be very careful. These are super, super hot, 475 degrees hot. If you just barely touch it with your arm or your finger, you will have a burn that will last you a couple of weeks. So please don't do that. All right, I'm going to take my lid off. Again, you don't have to put any grease, anything inside this to keep it from sticking. It is hot, so it will be naturally non-stick. So here's the tricky part, right? It's gymnastics. You got to stick the landing. I just found this is the best way to work. I take my proofing bowl and I just turn it over and let it go in. So you see you have those nice ridges from the proofing bowl. That's where those come from. You see those nice loaves you get at a bakery. All right, so when I bought these proofing baskets, they came with a bread lane, which is kind of a, well, it's just a kind of a curved razor blade on a stick. And this particular bread lane was true to its name, it was lame. It did not really cut the bread well, it more tore it, and so I'm just using a serrated knife. And you can cut whatever pattern you want, but what you want to do is allow for expansion of the loaf without it tearing. So I'm going to cut a little circular pattern like this. As you see, even that little bit of cutting is deflating the loaf a little bit, but if you're nice and gentle, it'll come back. So I'm just going to trace that around. All right, and that's it. I'm going to put the lid on, put it in the oven, and this is where personal preferences come in. Again, on the book, I'm going to set this timer for 34 minutes. That's what I found works best for me. In the book, Ken Forkish talks about he has his loaves very dark. He thinks that gives the crust a better flavor. He's not wrong, but it's personal preference. He said he also had a lot of problems when he opened his bakery that people thought that the loaves looked burnt. They still bought the bread and they still liked it, but this is just a personal preference. I kind of agree that less time is better for me. So what I've done is I've discovered 34 minutes is the perfect time. So play around with this. And he does it for 45 minutes, he does it for 30 minutes with the lid on, and then 15 minutes with the lid off to get it nice and dark. Again, it's whatever you prefer. I think you need to go at least 30 minutes, or otherwise that dough in the very center of the bread is not cooked. And if that happens, there's no going back in the oven. All right. So play around with your oven, how it works. All ovens are a little different. It's going to take some experimentation. Okay, so now we're going to let the oven work its magic. We're going to enjoy the wonderful smell, and we will get back when we pull it out. We're back. The timer's going off. Again, be very careful. This is very hot. And yes, if you're baking the 2 loaves that the recipe calls, there's going to be, you're going to do this 2 times. You could bake them both at once. Look at there. You could bake them both at once on a sheet pan if you decided to. But I think this works better. This gives you that nice chewy crust baking in the Dutch oven. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little spatula. I'm going to get underneath. As you see, it's not sticking, okay? And I'm going to show you a couple things about the bread here. So this is called an ear. That's what you want. In other words, that little circular cut we made kind of pulled up as the bread was pushing. So you can look in there and see all those little bubbles and everything that pushed it up. And we also got a split down this way. So essentially what this does is it allows the bread to expand. If you don't cut it at all, it's still going to bake, but this gives it a little extra boost and a little extra expand. And as you can see, the crust is dark, but it's not too dark. So again, this is after experiments, getting it just right. And you're gonna have that little bit of flour on the outside, but that's okay because it makes it, you know, gives it that artisan look. All right, so I'm gonna transfer this over here with the other one. So there you go, we have 2 loaves of bread. Now here's the trick, don't throw them in a bag right away. They really need to sit out. It's, right now my time is 8:55, okay? So let's say 9 a.m. I don't want to even think about putting these into a bag until maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon, okay? You want to let them sit out that long. Now, if you're giving these as a gift or something, you know, you can get a linen bag or a paper bag or something to transport it in. But again, once these completely cool and relax, then you want to use probably one of those 2-gallon Ziploc bags to store it in, okay? And then you'll practice your cutting skills. So I recommend when you're cutting that you have a good quality serrated blade, okay? The thing is this is not high quality. I got this one and the other one you saw me using earlier for about $12 at Bed Bath & Beyond. The thing with a serrated blade is over time it will wear down, so you got to replace it. But this will give you a good slice. You just got to practice on slicing it nice and clean and getting your thickness right. I recommend going slowly, letting the knife do the work. Okay, we are back with the final products. One thing that's real important is to not try and cut the bread too soon. If you try and cut it when it's right out of the oven, hey, I'm not going to stop you, that's okay. But if you try and cut it when it's right out of the oven, the crust is going to be really hard. You're going to end up smushing the bread and you're just not going to get a good slice. So this came out of the oven, I guess about 9 today. It's maybe it was 8:30. It's around noon, so it's had a couple hours to relax. Okay, I have a good, nice, sharp, serrated blade. Okay, and I'm gonna just cut a little slice so you can see the inside of this loaf. Again, it's still nice and crusty on the outside. See, this is why I want a nice, sharp knife. I'm gonna let the knife do the work. I'm just gonna slowly drag it through. And that bottom is, you know, still pretty crusty, so it's kind of hard to get through. All right, so you can see here, we have a good, you know, we have a couple big bubbles, and that's fine. You want that, but as far as everything else, we have a nice tight structure. It looks good. It looks done. And this is the part that you finally get to enjoy what you're doing. So all that work culminates in this. Again, this recipe is 2 loaves. That generally will last us through most of the week, believe it or not. And after I slice this, I'm going to put it in a plastic bag to keep it fresh. Just make sure it's completely cooled before you do that. And what, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. Also, you know, keep in mind that this bread, it has no preservatives in it, but it will actually stay pretty fresh throughout the week. And it's a, you know, I did some experiments with it. This bread won't grow mold until well into the 2nd week. So it stores well if you keep it fresh. And I found that those 2 loaves will last a family of 4. I mean, we're not eating sandwiches every day, but it will generally last us a week. And so I'll be ready to start the process over next weekend. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about cleanup. All right, come in a little closer. And all right, so this is my Dutch oven. It's still very hot. Okay, I'm going to get a paper towel and moisten it just a little bit. Now, I recommend doing this once it's cooled off, but I are a professional. Okay, so all you got to do, is just wipe it down with a damp cloth, and you wipe that little excess flour out, and then you're good. You know, over time, as you see, if you use it a lot, your Dutch oven will, you know, have some character, just like the rest of us. Okay. Now I could scrub this and scrub this and scrub this, and it won't come off, but it's no big deal. All right, it still works. It's still clean on the inside, but it's going to get, you know, some stains as you cook with it, and that's just normal. So all you do is wipe it out. You don't need to soap and water. You just wipe it out with a damp paper towel. Okay, so let's talk about cleanup with other items and just maintenance. So with my baskets, all right, as I dump the bread out of the basket, you see there's some little bits of flour. Okay, I have a brush that I use for this and only this. You might have to hide it in your house so nobody else uses it to, you know, scrub the floor with or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to brush that excess flour out. All right, I'm going to go around the bottom and the top and the ridge and everything and just brush out that excess flour. And I'm going to turn this over and just tap it out. Now, as you can see, there's still some little bits in there. You can scrub a little harder if you want to, or use the, you know, a little something to get down in there. But a few little bits of dried flour, no big deal. If those come off when the bread is baking, they will just fall off the bread. So it's no big deal. But eventually, you know, just like a well-seasoned pan, this is going to be seasoned too. That first time you use it, it's going to be tricky. Use a lot of extra flour. But after that, you know, once the flour gets into the rattan, it will season it a little bit, and it will come out of the basket easier. All right, so again, I'm just going to do the same thing with the other one. All right, when you store these, I just store them upside down, either in a cabinet or somewhere like that, and then they're ready for use again. All right, well, I hope this helps you with your bread baking. Again, a lot of success depends on your technique. So keep experimenting, use different kinds of flour if you want. There's all different kinds of information on the internet, including this video, so I appreciate you watching, and please feel free to leave comments. All right, thank you very much, and have a good day.